buhay! In this session, pag-uusapan naman natin ang history ng kape. Tara, magkape tayo! Ang salitang kape ay nag-ugat sa iba't ibang wika. Halimbawa na lamang sa bansang Yemen, ito ay nagmula sa salitang kawa na kilala din bilang romantic term na tumutukoy naman sa alak na nagmula sa ubas. Hanggang sa ito ay naging salitang kabe na tawag ng mga Turkish, samantala sa bansang the Netherlands ang salitang kopi ay ginagamit naman ng mga Dutch. Sa kasalukuyan, ito ay kilala sa bansa natin bilang coffee na hango naman sa wikang Ingles or kape na nagmula sa salitang Kastila na ang ibig sabihin ay cafe na parehong tumutukoy sa napakasarap na inumin na kape. Noong taong 850 sa bansang Ethiopia, according to a legend, may isang goat herder na nagngangalang Kaldi na kung saan siya ay nagpapastol kasama ang kanyang mga alagang kambing. Habang nagpapahinga, napansin niya na ang mga kambing ay bigla na lamang naging masigla. Wow! Tila napatiktok ang mga ito. Ito ay nangyari pagkatapos ngumuya ng red berries ang kanyang mga alagang kambing. Ito naman ay sinundan ni Kaldi na kumain at ngumuya ng mga berries. And eventually, napawaw na wow at nasampit niya na ang mga berries ay nagmula sa langit dahil sa stimulant na meron ito. At ito ang hudyat sa pagka-discover ng coffee cherry. Si Kaldi ay nagmadali para ipaabot ang balita sa kanilang abbot of the local monastery. At dahil dito'y di umano, ang abbot ay nakaisip na patuyuin ang berries at pakuluan ito upang gawing inumin. Ayon sa kwento, ang berries ay itinapon sa apoy at umalingasaw ang aroma sa hangin. Sinasabi na ang roasted beans ay pinulbos at ito ay dinisolve sa mainit na tubig. Ito ngayon ang sinasabi na world's first cup of coffee. May ibang version ang kwentong ito. Sinasabi naman ni si Kaldi ay pinaniwalaan ng kanilang chief monk. At sinabihan pa itong, napoposes ka ba? At di umano sa kwento that the berries were condemned and associated this as devil's work. Kaya naman ito ay itinapon sa apoy. Subalit, ang amoy na mula sa fresh roasted coffee ay bumalot sa buong monasteryo that enticed the monks. Although, there are stories that would say that the first brewing happened in Yemen. Kumalat ang balita sa ibang parte ng Ethiopia. At ito ang Gela tribe. The Gela mixed the berry with G, as in G-H-E-E, a clarified butter, and pressed the mixture into a scrumptious power bar. At ito naman ang ginamit ng mga mandirigma bilang energizing snack. In fact, similar bars are still eaten in Kaffa and Sidamo, Ethiopia hanggang sa mga panahong ito. Another thing we know for sure ay kung saan naglakbay ang kape. Ito ay tumawid sa Red Sea papuntang Yemen noong ika-15 siglo. Sa Arabian Peninsula nagsimulang i-cultivate at magbenta ng kape. In fact, ang first brewing of coffee happens in the Arabian Peninsula. Coffee was being grown in the Yemeni district of Arabia, and by the 16th century, it was known in Persia, Egypt, Syria, and Turkey. Coffee was not only enjoyed in homes, but also in many public coffee houses called kave-khane, which began to appear in cities across the Near East. The popularity of the coffee houses was unequaled and people frequented them for all kinds of social activities. Istanbul was first introduced to coffee in 1555 during the reign of Sultan Salamat, the Magnificent of Özdemir Pasha, the Ottoman governor of Yemen, who had grown to love the drink while stationed in that country. In the Ottoman palace, nagkaroon naman ng bagong method sa pag-inom ng kape. The beans were roasted over a fire, finely ground and then slowly cooked with water on the ashes of a charcoal fire. With its new brewing method and aroma, coffee's renown soon spread even further afield. Coffee soon became a vital part of palace cuisine and was very popular in court. The position of chief coffee maker or kavachebashi was added to the roster of court functionaries. The chief coffee maker's duty was to brew the Sultan's or his patron's coffee and was chosen for his loyalty and ability to keep secrets. The annals of Ottoman history record a number of chief coffee makers who rose through the ranks to become Grand Viziers to the Sultan. Coffee soon spread from the palace to grand mansions and from grand mansions to the homes of the public. The people of Istanbul quickly became enamored with the beverage. Green coffee beans were purchased and then roasted at home on pans. The beans were then ground in mortars and brewed in coffee pots known as zezve. Sa mga panahong iyon, karamihan sa general public ay nakilala na ang kape dahil sa mga coffee houses. Alam ba ninyo na ang Daghang is the world's first coffee shop na binuksan sa Constantinople na kilala ngayon bilang Istanbul na kapitolyo ng Turkey noong 1475. Coffee was of such great importance then. In fact, legal na gawin ng mga kababaihan na may asawa na i-divorce ang kanilang husband if failed to provide her with her daily cup. Coffee houses and coffee culture soon became an integral part of Istanbul's social culture. Sometimes in 1600, ang mga mangangalakal na Olandes from New Amsterdam bring coffee to America. Just 4 years later, the British take control of New Amsterdam na ngayon ay kilala bilang New York. Sinasabi na ang kape ay sikat na sa mamamayan ng New York or mga New Yorkers. New York's first coffee houses, they sell ale, wine, and tea. Kasama na rin dito yung mga may init na tsokolate, as well as kape. They also serve food and have rooms for rent, making them more like taverns than coffee houses. Noong 1603, si Captain John Smith, in his travel book, binanggit niya dito yung salitang kofa, na ito ay referring to the Turks' drink. In 1607, the colony of Virginia at Jamestown is founded with the help of Captain John Smith, who is said to have introduced the first coffee to the North America. However, some historians say coffee had already been introduced to Canada before this time. Samantala sa Europa, European travelers to the Near East brought back stories of an unusual dark black beverage. Noong ika-17 siglo, ang kape ay nakarating na sa kontinente ng Europa at ito ay nagsimulang makilala. May mga tao na nag-react sa inumin na ito and they have suspicion or fear calling it the bitter invention of Satan. Ang mga local clergy or saserdote or ang mga kaparian ay kinundi na ito nang makarating sa Venice noong taong 1615. The controversy was so great that Pope Clement VIII was asked to intervene. He decided to taste the beverage for himself before making a decision and found the drink so satisfying that he gave it papal approval. Despite such controversy, coffee houses were quickly becoming centers of social activity, and communication in the major cities of England, Austria, France, Germany, and Holland. In England, penny universities sprang up, so called because for the price of a penny, one could purchase a cup of coffee and engage in stimulating conversation. Alam ba ninyo na ang Arabia was the gatekeeper for coffee? Kung ang bansa ay naisin ang coffee beans, ito ay dapat bilhin sa Yemen. Ang mga pinuno ng gobyerno ay mahigpit dito. They make sure that nobody could take fertile beans out of their control and plant the trees themselves. Subalit, nang dumating si Baba Budan, a Sufi saint from India who was on a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1670. Noong bumalik si Baba Budan sa bansang India, he smuggled some fertile beans where he began coffee cultivation. These beans began a large-scale coffee farming in southern India, which are still producing plants today. In the late 1600s, the Dutch finally started growing coffee. Decades earlier, the Dutch had smuggled coffee plants from Yemen in an attempt to grow the beans in Holland. But due to the cold weather, their cultivation scheme failed miserably. In the early 18th century, the Dutch decided to extend their generosity in a way that would change the world of coffee farming forever. In 1714, the mayor of Amsterdam presented a gift of a young coffee plant to King Louis XIV of France. Although the Dutch could not cultivate coffee trees in Holland, they could keep them alive in special greenhouses. In 1723, a young naval officer, Gabriel Duclos, obtained a seedling from the king's plant. He was stationed in Martinique but happened to be visiting Paris. It is unclear whether he ended up stealing clippings from King Louis, wherein we know it is a secured coffee tree, or if King Louis himself gave order for Duclos to establish a coffee plantation in Martinique. Despite a challenging voyage, complete with horrendous weather, a saboteur who tried to destroy the seedling, and pirate attack, he managed to transport it safely to Martinique. Within 3 years, coffee plantations spread throughout Martinique, Saint Dominic, and Guadeloupe. This would be the plants that would eventually populate the rest of the Caribbean and Central and South America. Did you know that the Brazil grows more coffee today than any other country in the world? So, how did it all get started? With a Brazilian colonel by the name of Francisco de Melo Palheta, Francisco was sent to Guyana to settle a dispute between the Dutch and the French in 1727. His priority, however, was to get coffee and bring it back to Brazil, whatever the cost. French governor refusing to give the Brazilian colonel coffee seedlings. The Brazilian colonel requested coffee seedlings from the French governor. When his requested was refused, his seductive backup plan came into play. He worked his magic on the French governor's wife, and eventually she managed to secretly give Francisco a handful of clippings. He took these clippings back to Brazil and started the largest coffee empire on the planet. Brazilian colonel taking coffee plant clippings to Brazil, which led to the boom of coffee plantation in the country. It wasn't until 1822 that coffee production started to boom in Brazil, and in 1852, The country became the largest producer of coffee and has remained to this day. In 1893, coffee from Brazil was taken to Kenya and Tanzania, close to the birthplace of coffee and cultivated in East Africa. In 1730, the English governor of Jamaica, Sir Nicholas Lewis, brought plants of coffee to his island. Within a short time, coffee was growing deep into the Blue Mountains, an exceptional growing area for coffee, and it is noted as one of the most expensive coffee beans in the world. By the mid-17th century, there were over 300 coffee houses in London, many of which attracted like-minded patrons, including merchants, shippers, brokers, and artists. Many businesses grew out of these specialized coffee houses. Lloyd's of London, for example, came into existence at the Edwards Lloyd's Coffee House. Through coffee houses rapidly began to appear, tea continued to be the favored drink in the world until 1773, when the colonists revolted against a heavy tax on tea imposed by King George III. The revolt, known as the Boston Tea Party, would forever change the American drinking preference for coffee. So how America shaped the industry of coffee? America's journey with coffee started in the 18th century with the Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution. That was 1773. A group of patriots, many dressed as American Indians, snuck aboard English tea ships sitting in the Boston harbor and dumped all of the tea into the ocean to rebel against the English tax on tea. So, the Americans dumping tea into the ocean, thus, tea became extremely unpatriotic and coffee replaced it as an American beverage of choice. Ever since then, the United States has been the leading importer of coffee and continues to buy far more coffee than any other country. This countrywide dependency on the beans has been an economic stimulus to many countries throughout South and Central America. Not only does America import coffee, but it actually grows a little bit of it as well. Hawaii, which is not part of America until 1959, was introduced to coffee in 1817, when coffee seedlings were brought by the Brazilians. In 1825, the first official coffee orchard was born, starting Kona's legacy in the industry of coffee. Missionaries and travelers, traders and colonists continued to carry coffee seeds to new lands, and coffee trees were planted worldwide. Plantations were established in magnificent tropical forests and on rugged mountain highlands. Some crops flourished, while others were short-lived. New nations were established on coffee economies. Fortunes were made and lost. By the end of the 18th century, coffee had become one of the most profitable export crops. After crude oil, coffee is the most sought commodity in the world. It's a review time. Try to answer our 5 questions, and kapag ito ay nakuha mo, then ikaw ay mananalo ng house and lot. Charot lang.